Welcome to IsraelVision.tv. We're here with Avi Lipkin with the deceptions, or 5 deceptions of Islam, and now we're on to the 5th. So if you saw the early ones, you know where we're going. And if you haven't seen the early ones, I suggest you do so now. So Avi, let's go on to the 5th one.
Great to be back. The 5th deception of Islam is that the Quran is a holy book.
Whoa. I mean, everything you've said so far will get us both killed, Avi.
Yeah.
Can't you feel it? Like the hate, it's just it's intense.
By the way, when I speak in churches, many times Muslims come to the churches and they hear me, and they don't like what they hear, but they know that I'm saying it out of love, and that they're following.
That?
Yeah.
How do you do that? I do not. I mean, you speak like, the people on the extreme left, or even somebody sitting right beside me will say you sound like a fascist.
Yeah.
But you don't.
No, not at all.
It's not from a hateful place.
You know what? I love the German people. Jews get up and walk out when I say this. I even mourn for the 20 million Germans
Absolutely.
who died in World War II.
Absolutely.
Human beings in the image of God, killed by a crazy leader called Hitler. And by the way, I don't know if you know this or not, but 270 million Muslims died at the hands of fellow Muslims in the last,
How many?
270 million Muslims
How
were slaughtered by.
How do you come up with that number?
Well, I heard this from a history teacher who said, did some simple mathematics from what we know. And indeed,
Well, millions were killed in the 80s in the Iran-Iraq war by itself. Millions, like 3 or 4 million.
You have to understand, the Islamic countries are fighting each other all the time. And again, it's the fulfillment of Genesis 16, verse 11, where it says that Ishmael will be a wild donkey, his hand will be against all his brothers, and all his brothers will be against his hand. So the Quran, and this is a very unusual story. In 1987, I was a real estate agent. I didn't have a kippah on my head, I wasn't religious, but I worked in a religious company of real estate, and one day a rabbi came in, and I escorted him to a number of places. Didn't buy anything, but this is the only really important thing of that one year that I was in real estate. The rabbi invited me to his house, and he said to me, "Son, do you know who wrote the Quran?" I didn't know who wrote the Quran. I said, "Well, Muhammad wrote the Quran."
Right.
When you're ignorant.
He didn't write the Quran. He was illiterate.
He was illiterate. And so he said, no, son. He said, the Quran was written about
Jews and
80,
Christians.
80 years after his death. Now, what happened was, he died in 632 AD.
That's right.
80 years later is how much? 712.
Yeah.
What was in 712? The Muslims invaded Spain, Portugal, and France. The Muslims conquered North Africa. The Muslims conquered Western Europe. The Muslims conquered Arabia, the Middle East. They had a religion greater than our God. They had a God greater than our God, which of course is the devil. They needed a book greater than our book, which is the Bible, of the Jew and the Christian. The problem was, these were illiterate desert nomads, Bedouin, who didn't know how to read or write. And of course, nobody knew the Talmud or the New Testament or the Old Testament. So how do you get a book greater than the Judeo-Christian book? You kidnap a rabbi and a priest. And I mean, I was completely shocked, but and by the way, this has been confirmed by dozens of rabbis and priests.
Okay, but where do the Muslims say the Quran comes from?
They don't know. They say that it's the divine.
That it just came down?
Divine, infallible word of Allah to Muhammad. But again, Muhammad, like you said, he was illiterate, and the Quran was kind of compiled like 80 to 100 years after his death, at a time that Islam was literally conquering the world. They needed a book. They needed a holy book. How could they be a religion greater than our religion? How could they have a God greater than our God if they didn't have a book greater than our book? So they kidnapped a rabbi and a priest. The rabbi's name was Ovadia ben Shalom, or in Arabic, Abdallah ibn Salam. The name of the Christian priest is Sergius Bukhaira. And by the way, the Armenian Orthodox Church has a day of mourning every year where they commemorate the execution, the killing of their priest in Mecca and Medina, wherever the Quran was written. And when you've gone to seminary, I went to seminary 3 years to be a conservative rabbi, when you study the Jewish text, when you study the Christian text, and you read the Quran, you can feel palpably the fingerprint of the rabbi and the priest.
I want to ask you a question. Did the rabbi who wrote the Quran, did he put any sort of clues that he was a Jew writing this book?
Many, many clues. I'll give you one example. There are many chapters of the Quran that start with the three-letter Aleph Lam Mim, which is in Hebrew Aleph Lamed Mem. And you ask any Muslim, what is Aleph Lam Mim? Oh, they say, this is mysterious. This is
mysterious,
from Allah.
real mysterious.
It's from Allah. And but for every Jew, Aleph Lamed Mem means Ani Lo Ma'amin. The rabbi was starting these chapters. I don't believe any of this bullcrap, excuse the expression. Also, Aleph Lamed Mem, Jews many times, rabbis many times use code to get a message across.
Sure.
And the code can only be interpreted in many different ways. So Aleph Lam Mim is also Ele Lelo Mashma. These Lelo Mashmaot. These verses mean nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah. So the rabbi is kind of calling out to whoever would pick up the book and read it to see, hey, listen, this is crap. This is
Yeah, I have a sword to my head, and this is what I'm doing
Right.
to stay alive.
Right. Also, another thing.
I mean, what you're talking about, Avi, will get you absolutely 100% strung up.
Yeah. Well, like I said before, when the Muslims hear what I'm saying, if they go back and they check to see whether or not what I'm saying is right or wrong, they have to come to the conclusion that I'm right. And then they have to become either Jewish or Christian. Since the rabbis don't want them to be Jewish, so they have to become Christian. And I work with Christian missionaries to convert the Muslims, to save them. By the way, my message to all Christians is bring them to the Lord,
Sure.
or they'll bring you to the sword.
Well, there's another subject of your book, Christian Revival for Israel's Survival.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like a slogan.
Yes. Well, that's a very clearly political message, which is in addition to the 5 deceptions, it's another dimension in the message.
Avi, please explain to me and to the audience behind me, what is numerology and what happens when you apply the Jewish numerology or system of numbers, equating letters with numbers, and you get all sorts of weird stuff happening when you start doing that.
Right.
And people even think it's divination, but it's not. It's
Yeah.
just what it is.
Yeah.
What happens when you apply the Jewish numerology to Islam
Yes.
or to the Quran?
Well, indeed, like I said before, there was an Egyptian Muslim who had to flee from Egypt. His father was going to kill him because he said that the Quran never specifically says to kill the Jews, but the Hadith does, the Jews and the Christians. And so because he said that, the father had to kill him. So
Why?
because the Hadith is holier for Muslims even than the Quran.
Really?
Yeah.
And the Hadith isn't written down.
It is also, everything is written down now, but
But it wasn't back then.
Anyway, so he fled to Arizona. He became he was a genius. He became a mathematical genius and computer specialist, and he was the head of a mosque. He was what you'd call a moderate Muslim, and he was married to a Christian woman. He had 2 children with her. They never became Muslims, by the way. And but anyway, he was killed in his mosque because he said that there is a numerology of 3 and 19 in the Quran. And there were 2 verses in the Quran that did not have the 3 and the 19. Therefore, they were put in artificially by man, because they say the Quran is divine, infallible revelation of Allah to Muhammad. If there are 2 verses that don't have 3 and 19, then that was put in by man for political reasons. He was killed on orders from Pakistan. And all the information I have is from the FBI and also from the Arizona Daily Star newspaper in Tucson. I went all the way to Tucson to the archives to get the information.
Really?
That's chapter 19 of my book, because
Chapter 19.
3 and 19 are the Jewish numbers that the rabbi encoded when he wrote the Quran. And again, 19 stands for the lunar solar year, which the Jews follow. In other words, Christians follow the solar year, 365 and a quarter. Muslims follow the lunar year.
Which is 360.
Yeah, so it doesn't, they'll only coincides every 19 years. And like I said, Jews pray 3 times a day. And so 3 is there, and 19 benedictions, which we say 3 times a day. Anyway, this is some of the examples. And also there are other things also in the Quran which show that the Quran was written by a rabbi and was self-destructed by a rabbi and a priest also. Because it says things about Jesus, and then it says the opposite things about Jesus, that they are irreconcilable. So you read it, it doesn't make sense, because it says yes, and then it says no. But for example, in the Torah, it says that if you divorce your wife and you decide you want to remarry her, you can remarry her, except on one condition. If she has meanwhile married another man, then you may never marry that woman again, because she's been defiled by another man. And okay, in Islam, the rabbi put it in, and it's in the Quran, that if you divorce your wife, you cannot remarry her until you first force her to marry another guy, get him to divorce her, then you can marry her. It's the exact
What?
opposite. Yes, it's in the Quran. For example, it says, and you have the Ten Commandments. By the way, Jesus repeats the Ten Commandments.
Many, 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 many times.
You don't have it at all in the Quran, except one: "Thou shalt not murder." Now, what does it say in the Quran? "Thou shalt not kill any man whom Allah has not deemed that you should kill, except for a just cause."
So there's all sorts of.
It's very legalistic,
Yeah.
very Talmudic. Only a rabbi could write that, and he wrote that on purpose to self-destruct the Quran.
When will the intellectuals, so-called intellectuals in the West, when will they wake up, and why will they wake up?
Well, like I said before, people will wake up when millions of people die in the Christian West.
But this is such a horrendous thing you're saying.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm afraid that Western civilization and democracy is very comfortable. Western civilization and democracy does not want confrontation
No, it
with the
doesn't.
system.
Because democracies don't go to war. That's a huge, huge slogan that the UN says all the time. Democracies don't go to war.
Yeah. But like I said before, the Europeans didn't want to go to war against Hitler. And you know what happened with Czechoslovakia, what happened with Austria, and then later Poland, and eventually there was a war. And like I said before, Germans were terrible people, but Germans became good people when you banned the system. Muslims are good people. Ban the Islamic system. They will be blessed. We will be blessed. They will be blessed. Bring them to the Lord, or they will bring you to the sword. Because our God is the Lord, their God is the sword.
Thank you, Avi.